The restaurant was alive with soft music, the sound of glasses clinking, and the low hum of people's conversations. It was one of those expensive places where every detail, from the polished tables to the golden light of chandeliers, spoke of wealth. In the middle of the busy evening, the tall doors opened, and a man in a fine suit walked in with a woman beside him. He was a millionaire, known for his flashy lifestyle and expensive taste. The woman at his side, his girlfriend, wore a glittering dress and walked with an air of pride, as if the world belonged to her. Every step she took seemed to demand attention. The couple was guided to a corner table, and soon a young waitress walked over to serve them. She was polite with a soft smile on her face, even though she had been working long hours. She greeted them kindly, but the girlfriend gave her only a cold stare. When the waitress asked for their order, the girlfriend smirked and said in a sharp tone, "Just make sure you don't mess it up. I don't like mistakes from people like you." The words stung, but the waitress only nodded, writing the order carefully in her notepad. She had learned long ago that not every customer was kind. Still, she tried her best to stay calm and professional. As the evening went on, the girlfriend's attitude grew worse. She laughed at the way the waitress spoke, mocked the way she moved, and even whispered loudly to the millionaire about how people like her should be thankful to serve others. The millionaire chuckled lightly, not because he agreed, but because he was used to his girlfriend's arrogance. He rarely corrected her, preferring to avoid arguments. To the waitress, it seemed like they were both enjoying the humiliation. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity, placing food on the table with care and never letting her smile fade, no matter how hard it was. What the girlfriend did not notice was that they were not alone in watching this cruel scene. At a nearby table, another man sat silently, observing everything. He was not flashy like the millionaire, but there was something powerful about his calm presence. His suit was elegant yet simple, his watch discreet but expensive, and his eyes sharp, as though he noticed details others missed. Unlike the noisy laughter of the millionaire's girlfriend, his silence carried weight. This man was a billionaire, though very few in the room knew who he was. He had built his fortune through intelligence and discipline, and unlike many in his world, he valued respect above wealth. The billionaire watched the waitress closely, not out of pity, but out of admiration. He noticed how she controlled her emotions even when insulted, how she bowed slightly after every rude comment, and how she managed to keep her tone polite though her eyes carried sadness. Many people in her place might have snapped back or walked away, but she endured with quiet strength. To him, that showed more character than all the diamonds on the girlfriend's neck. The girlfriend, meanwhile, enjoyed herself too much to notice the eyes watching her. She continued her act, exaggerating her laughter every time the waitress came near. At one point, she dropped her napkin on the floor and ordered the waitress to pick it up as if she were a servant, not an employee. The waitress bent down, picked it up, and placed it back on the table without a word. The girlfriend smirked, clearly satisfied with her little victory. The millionaire finally grew slightly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and said, "All right, that's enough. She's just doing her job." But the girlfriend rolled her eyes. "You're too soft," she replied, sipping her drink. "People like her need to know their place." The millionaire sighed, clearly used to her cruel remarks. He looked away, pretending to be distracted by his phone. The waitress, after serving the main course, walked back to the counter. Her hands shook slightly, not from anger but from holding back tears. She had been insulted many times before, but tonight the cruelty had felt heavier because it came from someone who enjoyed it so openly. Still, she reminded herself that this was just one night, one customer, and her job meant more than their words. Her family depended on her. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes discreetly, and returned to the floor with the same soft smile. The billionaire, still watching, felt something stir inside him. It was not just sympathy, it was respect. In his world of power and wealth, he had seen many people with money, but very few with grace under pressure. Most rich people he knew lacked the very quality this young waitress had just shown: dignity. He leaned back in his chair, deep in thought while finishing his meal. He made no move, said no words, but in his mind, a quiet decision was being formed. He wanted to know more about this woman. The night finally came to an end. The millionaire and his girlfriend stood up to leave. The girlfriend threw one last smug look at the waitress and said, "Try to find a better job someday. You don't belong here." Then she walked out, laughing loudly as if she had won some battle. The waitress, tired but calm, simply whispered a polite goodbye. The millionaire gave her a half-hearted nod before following his girlfriend out the door. As the restaurant grew quiet again, the waitress began cleaning their table. She didn't know that her silent strength had left a deep impression on someone far more important than the people who had mocked her. She had no idea that fate was already turning its wheel, and the man who had silently watched would soon step into her life. The insults she had endured tonight were not the end of her story. They were only the beginning of something unexpected. The night at the restaurant was over, but the memory of the cruel words still followed the waitress as she walked home. Her steps were slow, her body tired, yet her spirit refused to break. People saw her only as a server carrying trays and taking orders, but there was so much more to her life than the uniform she wore. Behind her polite smile was a story of struggles, sacrifices, and silent strength that few could ever understand. Every morning, long before the sun rose, she would wake up in a small apartment she shared with her younger brother and her sick mother. The walls were old, the paint cracked, but she had filled the space with warmth and care. She would prepare breakfast quickly, making sure her brother ate before school and her mother took her medicine. Only after they were settled would she hurry to her classes at the university. Yes, she was a waitress at night, but in the day she was a student, fighting hard to earn her degree. She dreamed of becoming someone greater, someone who could change her family's future. But dreams cost money, and money was always short. That was why she worked long shifts at the restaurant, serving wealthy people who often didn't see her as a person. Still, she kept her head high because she knew every coin she earned carried meaning. Her classmates often wondered how she managed to juggle work and study. They admired her determination but also pitted her struggles. She never showed them how exhausted she felt inside, never complained about how unfair life was. Instead, she always said with a calm smile, "Hard work never goes to waste." Deep down, she truly believed that one day her sacrifices would bring results. There were times when the weight of it all almost crushed her. Nights when she would sit by her mother's bed, holding her hand, wondering how long she could keep going without breaking down. Nights when she returned home after facing insults at work, wiping away tears so her brother would not see her pain. But every time she felt weak, she reminded herself of the people she loved. Her brother's hopeful eyes and her mother's fragile smile gave her the strength to wake up and fight again. That strength was invisible to most. Customers at the restaurant only saw a waitress. They didn't know that the smile she wore was sometimes a mask to hide her fatigue. They didn't know that behind the polite "yes, sir," and "thank you," was a young woman battling life with quiet courage. But those who looked closely could sense something rare about her. It was in the way she spoke gently, the way she remained calm when tested, the way she carried herself with dignity even when others tried to belittle her. Her co-workers respected her. Many waitresses came and left, unable to handle the long hours or the rude customers. But she never gave up. She helped new staff learn, covered shifts when someone couldn't make it, and always kept the team spirit alive. They often told her she had the heart of a leader, though she only laughed and shook her head. Unknown to her, the billionaire who had watched her that night at the restaurant carried her image in his mind. For him, it wasn't just about beauty or charm. He had seen many beautiful faces in his life, but rarely had he seen such dignity in someone with so little. It intrigued him, almost as if he had discovered a hidden gem in a world full of polished stones. The waitress, however, had no idea that anyone had noticed her strength. To her, life was simply about survival and responsibility. She didn't care about being admired or judged. She cared about making sure her brother stayed in school and her mother received proper treatment. While others wasted their days chasing luxury, she was chasing stability, something most people took for granted. One evening, As she studied by the small lamp in her room, her brother asked, "Don't you ever get tired?" She smiled softly and replied, "Of course I do, but tiredness goes away. Regret stays forever. I don't want to regret not trying." Her brother nodded quietly, inspired by her words. He wanted to be strong like her when he grew up. Life continued to test her, but every test only made her stronger. She had faced rejection, poverty, and humiliation, but she carried each scar with pride, like medals of survival. If others judged her for being just a waitress, she didn't mind. She knew her worth was not tied to her job, her clothes, or her bank account. Her worth was tied to the strength of her heart and the honesty of her actions. The girlfriend of the millionaire who mocked her that night would never understand this kind of strength. To her, power meant showing off, wearing diamonds, and humiliating those below her. But real power was silent. It was in the way the waitress kept her dignity when mocked, in the way she refused to let bitterness poison her heart. That was the kind of power that could not be bought, only earned. As days turned into weeks, the waitress kept walking her path, unaware of how fate was watching. She thought she was invisible, just another worker serving rich people's dinners. But her character, her resilience, her unshakable kindness were quietly shining like a light in the dark. Someone had already noticed, and that silent respect was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. The insults she faced at the restaurant had hurt her, yes, but they had not defined her. What defined her was the strength to rise above them. And soon, the world would see what true strength looked like when fate decided to turn the page. The billionaire had left the restaurant quietly that night, but the image of the young waitress never left his mind. He was a man who had seen the world, traveled across countries, and met leaders, celebrities, and the most powerful businessmen. Yet, in that busy restaurant filled with wealth and laughter, it was the quiet dignity of a waitress that caught his attention. For days after, he found himself thinking about her calm eyes, the way she endured insults without losing her respect, and the softness of her smile even when she was hurting inside. This man was not like the millionaire who had sat at her table. His life had not always been easy. He had built his empire from nothing, starting with small steps, facing failures and learning through struggles. Because of that, he valued people who carried strength within them. He knew what it meant to fight for survival, to be underestimated, to be treated as less by those with more power. That was why he noticed the waitress when others ignored her. He could see in her the same fire that had once lived in him when he was young. The billionaire was not only rich but also careful about the people around him. He didn't trust easily. In his world, many came close to him only for money, status, or fame. But what he had seen in that young woman was something rare. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was simply herself, humble, hardworking, and patient. That honesty was more valuable to him than all the jewels he had seen on glamorous women. Days turned into weeks, and by coincidence, he found himself in the same city again. One evening, he decided to attend a charity event organized by a friend. The hall was filled with businessmen, wealthy families, and society's elite. People moved around in elegant gowns and black suits, holding glasses of wine, talking about deals and investments. It was a world where money spoke louder than kindness. Yet, among all the glitter and pride, he suddenly saw a familiar face. There she was, the same waitress from that night. But this time, she was not wearing her work uniform. She was dressed simply, in a modest dress, her hair tied back neatly. She was not there as a guest, but as a volunteer helping the event run smoothly. She moved around the hall, guiding guests, arranging tables, and carrying supplies with the same quiet dedication. Her face still carried that soft smile, though her hands were busy with work. The billionaire's eyes followed her as she moved. He noticed how different she looked compared to the wealthy women at the event. They wore diamonds, heels, and heavy makeup, while she wore simplicity. Yet somehow she stood out more than any of them. There was a natural beauty in her humility, a kind of grace that didn't need luxury to shine. When she finally walked past him, she didn't recognize him as the quiet man from the restaurant. To her, he was just another guest. She politely asked if he needed anything, her tone respectful yet warm. He looked at her for a moment before answering, "No, thank you." She nodded with a smile and continued her work, unaware that the most powerful man in the room was watching her closely. Later in the evening, when she had a short break, he approached her. He started a simple conversation, asking how long she had been volunteering and what motivated her to give her time for such events. She answered honestly, saying she believed in helping others, even in small ways. She spoke about how kindness could change someone's day, how she wanted to make a difference even if she didn't have much. Her words were simple, but they carried a depth that impressed him. They spoke longer than she expected. She told him about her studies, her family, and how she balanced work with education. She didn't complain about her hardships. Instead, she spoke with quiet pride about the responsibilities she carried. The billionaire listened carefully, and the more she spoke, the more he admired her. She was not trying to impress him, nor did she know who he really was. That honesty was rare, and it touched him deeply. As the night went on, other guests tried to catch his attention, but he found himself more interested in her. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of genuine connection. She reminded him of what truly mattered in life: character, humility, and kindness. When the event ended, he thanked her for her time and said softly, "It was good talking to you." She smiled politely, still not realizing she had just held the attention of a billionaire. After that night, the billionaire made a silent decision. He wanted to know her better. Not because of her looks, not because of her charm, but because he felt she carried something rare in this world. A heart that wealth could not buy. He knew it wouldn't be easy. She was not someone who trusted quickly, and she lived in a world far away from his. But he also knew that fate had brought their paths together for a reason. The waitress, on the other hand, went back to her normal life. She didn't think much about the kind man she had spoken to at the event. To her, he was just another guest who had treated her with respect, unlike many others. She continued her work, her studies, and her responsibilities, unaware that her life was slowly moving towards a turning point. The billionaire had entered her story silently, but his presence would not remain silent for long. What had started as a simple observation in a restaurant was now growing into something deeper. The young waitress had no idea that the man she spoke to so casually was already thinking about her in ways that would change both their lives. Fate had placed them in each other's path again, and this was only the beginning of a story neither of them expected. Life moved on for the young waitress. Her days were still filled with long hours of work and nights of studying. She had not given much thought to the kind man she had spoken to at the charity event. To her, he was just another polite guest, nothing more. She had no idea that the billionaire she had unknowingly impressed was still thinking about her. For him, that brief conversation had left a mark. He had spoken to countless people in his life, business partners, politicians, celebrities, but very few had spoken with such honesty and warmth. There was no agenda in her words, no hidden interest. She didn't know who he was, and that made her genuine. He wanted to see her again, but he also knew he couldn't simply walk into her life with his wealth and status. That wasn't the way to truly know someone's heart. Fate, however, seemed to be on his side. Weeks later, another charity event was organized, this time in the open gardens of a cultural center. The evening air was cool, lanterns lit the paths, and soft music played in the background. Guests dressed elegantly, mingling and laughing. Once again, the waitress was there, not as a guest but as a volunteer. She moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying trays, arranging decorations, and making sure everything ran smoothly. The billionaire arrived quietly, without the noise and attention that usually followed him. He preferred it that way. He walked among the guests with a calm confidence, his eyes scanning the crowd. And then he saw her again. She was helping an elderly woman find her seat, speaking kindly and offering her arm for support. Her smile was gentle, her patience endless. Even in a place filled with wealthy people, she stood out, not because of her clothes or jewels, but because of her kindness. The billionaire felt the same quiet admiration he had felt before. Fate had given him a second chance. This time, he decided not to let the opportunity pass. After the event program began and things settled, he approached her once more. She recognized him as the man she had spoken to before, though she still didn't know his true identity. She greeted him politely. "Good evening, sir. I hope you're enjoying the event." He smiled slightly and replied, "Yes, but I think it's the people here who make it special, not just the event." She tilted her head, curious at his words. Unlike other wealthy guests, he didn't talk about himself, didn't boast about his life. Instead, he asked her about her studies, her family, and her dreams. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't used to people being genuinely interested in her life. But his calm eyes and respectful tone made her feel safe to share. They walked together near the garden's edge, where the lights reflected on the water of a small fountain. She spoke about how hard it was to balance work and studies, about how she often felt invisible in a world that only noticed wealth and beauty. She confessed that sometimes she wondered if her hard work would ever pay off, but she always reminded herself to keep going. The billionaire listened carefully, saying little, but feeling every word. Her honesty touched him deeply. Unlike so many people he met who only talked about money and power, she spoke about life, hope, and resilience. For him, it was refreshing. For her, it was surprising to find someone who listened without judgment. At one point, she laughed softly and said, "I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Maybe because you don't look like someone who would laugh at me." He smiled warmly and answered, "Sometimes, the most ordinary stories are the most extraordinary." His words stayed in her heart longer than she expected. As the evening went on, they spoke more, and she felt a strange comfort in his presence. He was different from the arrogant customers she often served. He didn't look down on her, didn't mock her. He treated her as an equal, as if her words mattered. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as a struggling student, but as a person. When the event ended, he thanked her again for the conversation. "You have a way of making people believe in goodness," he said softly before leaving. She stood still for a moment, surprised by his words. She didn't know why, but his presence stayed with her even after he walked away. That night, as she returned home, her brother noticed her thoughtful expression. "You look different today," he said. She laughed lightly and replied, "Maybe because someone reminded me that my struggles are not worthless." She didn't explain more, but deep down she felt a small spark of hope. For the billionaire, the second meeting confirmed what he had felt before. She was not just a passing face. There was something about her that pulled him closer, something he couldn't ignore. He didn't yet know where this path would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to see her again. Neither of them realized that their lives were slowly weaving together, that destiny was quietly writing a story they couldn't yet see. The waitress thought she was still invisible in the grand world of wealth, and the billionaire thought he was only an observer in her life. But fate had other plans, and this was just the second step toward a future neither of them imagined. The millionaire's girlfriend had always lived as if the world belonged to her. She loved expensive dinners, designer clothes, and the attention that came with being seen beside a wealthy man. But her beauty and charm hid an arrogance that grew stronger every day. She never missed a chance to remind people that she was special, and to her, humiliating others made her feel more powerful. After the night at the restaurant where she mocked the waitress, her pride grew even more. She laughed about it later, telling her friends how she put the girl in her place. They cheered her on, not because they admired her, but because they enjoyed being close to her glittering lifestyle. She didn't notice that most people around her were only interested in her because of the millionaire's money. The millionaire, however, was beginning to feel the weight of her arrogance. At first, he had been charmed by her beauty and confidence. She was lively, bold, and exciting. But as time went on, he started to see the cracks behind the glitter. She argued often, demanded more gifts, and never seemed satisfied. Every evening became a performance where she complained about something, the food, the service, or even his friends. The millionaire, though rich, was not blind. He noticed how she treated waiters, drivers, and even strangers. She had no kindness for anyone who could not give her something in return. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was just her personality. But slowly, it started to bother him. He began asking himself if this was really the woman he wanted to spend his life with. Their arguments grew louder. Once, when he suggested spending an evening quietly at home, she mocked him, saying, "What's the point of being rich if you don't show it off?" Another time, when he introduced her to a business partner's wife, she rudely dismissed the woman, calling her boring, simply because she wasn't glamorous. Each insult she threw made the millionaire feel more embarrassed. He was beginning to see that her beauty was only on the outside, and inside there was a heart filled with pride. One evening, at a social gathering, her behavior crossed a line. Surrounded by wealthy guests, she began boasting loudly about how she would never waste her time with poor people. Her words made several guests uncomfortable, but she laughed as if she had said something clever. The millionaire, standing beside her, felt ashamed. He noticed the way people looked at him, not with respect, but with pity, as if wondering why he stayed with someone so cruel. When the night ended, he confronted her. "Do you realize how you make people feel?" he asked. She rolled her eyes and replied, "I don't care what they feel. If they can't handle the truth, that's their problem." Her answer hit him hard. He realized she didn't care about respect, kindness, or dignity. To her, life was only about showing off and stepping on others. The more he thought about it, the more he saw how empty their relationship was. There was no real love between them, only glamour and greed. He had been blinded by her beauty, but now that beauty felt hollow. He wanted peace, honesty, and kindness, not endless drama and pride. Meanwhile, the girlfriend continued her arrogant lifestyle. She bragged to her friends about the expensive gifts she expected, demanded more from the millionaire, and never noticed that his patience was running out. She lived in her own bubble, believing that money and beauty would always keep her safe. But her downfall came slowly, like a storm building in the distance. One day, after another argument, the millionaire decided he had had enough. He told her calmly, "I can't do this anymore. I don't want to live with someone who disrespects everyone around her." She laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But when she saw the seriousness in his eyes, her smile faded. "You're leaving me? Me? Do you know who I am?" she shouted. He replied quietly, "Yes, I do. That's the problem." His words cut deeper than any insult. For the first time, she realized her pride had cost her everything. News of their breakup spread quickly in their social circle. The same friends who once clapped at her jokes now began to distance themselves. Without the millionaire's wealth, she was no longer the center of attention. Invitations stopped coming. People who once flattered her now ignored her. She discovered too late that her friendships were built on shallow ground. Her fall was painful. She had spent years building an image of glamour and superiority, only to watch it collapse in weeks. She had no kindness to fall back on, no true friends to support her. All she had left was the bitter taste of arrogance and regret. The millionaire, though hurt by the failed relationship, felt lighter without her constant negativity. For the first time in years, he realized he wanted something more meaningful. He wanted someone who could bring peace, not pride. He didn't know it yet, but fate was already leading him toward a woman who had those very qualities. The same waitress his girlfriend had once mocked. The ex-girlfriend, meanwhile, sat alone, replaying her past words and actions. She remembered the night she had insulted the waitress, laughing as if it were nothing. Now she understood what true weakness was. It wasn't poverty or being ordinary. It was living without kindness, without respect, without love. She had lost not only a relationship but also the respect of everyone around her. And it was her own arrogance that had caused it. Her story became a quiet warning whispered in the same circles she once ruled. Beauty fades, pride destroys, but kindness lasts forever. The waitress's life had always been simple. She worked long hours at the restaurant, earning just enough to pay her rent and support her younger brother. Life was not easy, but she carried her struggles quietly. She never complained, never showed anger, and always greeted people with a smile. Many customers never noticed her, but those who did often remembered her kindness. After the dramatic night when she was humiliated by the millionaire's girlfriend, she thought the moment would fade away. For her, insults were not new. She had faced many rude customers before, but something about that evening felt different. She noticed the look in the millionaire's eyes when his girlfriend mocked her. It was not laughter, it was discomfort. She pushed the thought aside, not realizing how much that moment had already changed her fate. In the days that followed, she continued her work as usual. She wiped tables, served meals, and smiled politely at strangers. But whispers began to spread. People who had been at the restaurant that night told others about the scene. They spoke not only about the girlfriend's arrogance but also about the waitress's calm dignity. The story traveled quietly at first, then more loudly, until it reached people she had never met. One afternoon, the millionaire returned to the restaurant. He was no longer with his girlfriend. His expression was calmer, almost lighter, but his eyes seemed searching. When he saw the waitress, he paused as if deciding whether to approach her. She greeted him with the same polite smile she gave every customer. He ordered his meal, and when she served it, he said softly, "I owe you an apology for that night." The waitress was surprised. "You don't owe me anything, sir," she replied gently. "People often say things they don't mean." But he shook his head. "No, you don't understand. I should have spoken up. You didn't deserve that." His words touched her, not because he was rich, but because he was honest. She nodded and thanked him, and the conversation ended there. But something had changed between them. Over time, the millionaire began visiting the restaurant more often. At first, it was once a week, then twice, and soon almost every other day. He spoke kindly to her, asking about her day, her family, her dreams. Unlike others, he didn't treat her as invisible. He listened. She found herself looking forward to his visits, though she never admitted it out loud. The millionaire saw in her something he had never seen in his glamorous circles: genuine warmth. She didn't care about his money, his clothes, or his status. She spoke to him as if he were just another person. That simplicity felt like a rare treasure. Meanwhile, his ex-girlfriend's fall was being whispered everywhere. Many people compared her arrogance to the waitress's grace. It was almost as if life itself was showing the difference between pride and humility. The more people spoke about it, the more respect the waitress earned. She became known not as just a server, but as the woman who carried herself with dignity even under insult. One evening, the millionaire invited her to sit with him after her shift. At first, she hesitated. She was not used to such attention, especially from someone like him. But he insisted, promising only a friendly conversation. They sat together and he asked about her life. She told him about her brother, her struggles, and her dreams of studying one day. She didn't hide her hardships, but she didn't complain either. She spoke with quiet strength, as if she had accepted life's challenges with courage. The millionaire listened, deeply moved. He realized that this woman, who had so little, had more strength and grace than anyone he had ever dated. She didn't chase luxury, yet she had something far more valuable: a kind heart. Soon, word began to spread in their community. People started noticing the millionaire's growing friendship with the waitress. Some gossiped, some judged, but many admired. To them, it felt like a story out of a movie. A rich man finding truth and peace in the company of a simple woman. The waitress, however, remained humble. She never bragged, never acted differently, even as people whispered about her. She continued working hard, serving customers with the same polite smile. Inside, though, she was slowly realizing that her life was changing. Her brother noticed it first. "You're happier these days," he said one evening. She smiled but didn't answer. Deep down, she knew he was right. Something was blooming in her heart, something she hadn't felt in years. As weeks turned into months, the millionaire's respect for her grew stronger. He admired her humility, her courage, and her honesty. She reminded him of what really mattered in life. For years, He had been surrounded by people who only cared about wealth and power. But here was someone who had nothing yet lived with more dignity than all of them. The turning point came when the millionaire invited her to a small charity event. At first, she refused, saying, "I don't belong in places like that." But he gently replied, "You belong wherever kindness belongs. And that means everywhere." At the event, she felt nervous. Many eyes turned toward her, some curious, some judgmental. But as the evening went on, people noticed her simplicity, her polite manners, and the way she spoke with quiet confidence. She didn't try to impress anyone, and that, ironically, impressed everyone the most. For the first time in her life, she realized people were seeing her not as a servant, but as a person worthy of respect. It was overwhelming but beautiful. She had risen, not by chasing money or status, but by holding onto her dignity. Her rise was not loud or glamorous. It was quiet, steady, and powerful. She had faced humiliation, but she turned it into strength. She had been invisible, but now she was seen. And in the heart of the millionaire, she had already become something far greater than just a waitress. She had become the symbol of what he had been searching for all along. Real love built on respect. The evening was brighter than usual. The ballroom glittered with golden lights, crystal chandeliers, and the sound of soft music filling the air. It was a charity event where the city's wealthiest people had gathered. Everyone came dressed in their finest clothes, hoping to be noticed, hoping to be admired. People whispered names of famous businessmen, celebrities, and politicians as they entered the hall. Among them was the billionaire, calm and confident as always. But that night he was not alone. Walking beside him was the waitress, no longer in her uniform but dressed in a simple yet elegant gown. Her hair was tied neatly, her makeup soft and natural. She looked different, yet she was still herself, humble, graceful, and kind. The billionaire held her hand as they entered, and the crowd immediately turned to look. Some faces showed curiosity, some shock, and some even jealousy. The whispers began quickly. "Is that her? She looks familiar. Isn't she the waitress from the restaurant? What is she doing here with him?" People stared, some with surprise, others with disbelief. But the billionaire ignored the noise. He walked with her proudly, as though she was the only person in the room who mattered. Across the hall, the millionaire's ex-girlfriend stood with a group of people. She was dressed in diamonds, her smile wide as she tried to gain attention. But when her eyes landed on the waitress, her face froze. At first, she thought it was a mistake. How could the same woman she mocked and insulted at the restaurant be standing here, beside one of the richest men in the city? Her chest tightened, anger mixing with humiliation. She whispered to her friends, mocking the waitress again, but her voice shook with disbelief. What is she even doing here? She doesn't belong in a place like this. Yet deep down, she was afraid. She could feel the balance of power shifting. The billionaire and the waitress moved around the hall, greeting people. At first, the waitress felt nervous. The stares, the whispers, the judgmental eyes, all of it weighed heavily on her. But every time she felt uneasy, the billionaire squeezed her hand gently, as if reminding her that she was not alone. And slowly, her nerves settled. She lifted her head and smiled with quiet confidence. When they reached the table where the ex-girlfriend stood, silence filled the space. Everyone sensed the tension. The ex-girlfriend forced a laugh and said loudly, "Oh, look who it is! The waitress. I hope she doesn't spill anything tonight." A few people chuckled awkwardly, but most remained quiet, waiting to see what would happen. The waitress did not answer. She only looked at her with calm eyes, the same way she had looked that night in the restaurant when she had been mocked. Her silence spoke louder than any insult could. The billionaire, however, smiled politely and said, "You're right. She is a waitress, and she is also much more than that. She is my future fiancée." The words dropped like thunder in the hall. Gasps filled the air, and for a moment, even the music seemed to pause. The ex-girlfriend's face turned pale, her smile vanishing instantly. Her friends stared in shock, unsure whether to laugh or believe what they had just heard. The billionaire continued calmly, his voice firm but kind. She may have served tables, but she carries more dignity and strength than many people in this room. She did not need wealth or diamonds to shine. She shined with kindness, and that is why I chose her. The room erupted into whispers. Some people admired the billionaire's courage. Others were stunned by the unexpected twist. The ex-girlfriend stood frozen, her face burning with humiliation. She had mocked the waitress for being less. But now the same woman stood higher than her, chosen not for beauty or status, but for her heart. The waitress felt her eyes grow wet, but she held her tears back. She could hardly believe what had just happened. In front of everyone, he had not only defended her but announced her as his future partner. For years, she had been invisible to people like this. Now the entire room saw her. The ex-girlfriend tried to recover. She laughed bitterly and said, "Well, enjoy your fairy tale. Let's see how long it lasts." But her words sounded weak, almost desperate. No one laughed with her this time. Instead, people turned their attention back to the waitress, curious about the woman who had captured the heart of a billionaire. As the evening went on, more and more people approached them. Some congratulated them sincerely, others out of politeness. But the waitress remained humble. She did not act proud or arrogant. She thanked people softly, always keeping her grace. The billionaire, on the other hand, never left her side, making sure she felt safe. By the end of the night, the whispers had changed. No one was talking about the ex-girlfriend anymore. All the attention had shifted to the waitress, the woman who had gone from being mocked at a restaurant to being introduced as a billionaire's fiancée. As they left the hall, the billionaire looked at her and said, "You see, you don't need to be afraid. You belong here as much as anyone else." She smiled through her tears, whispering, "I never imagined this. Not even in my dreams." He squeezed her hand again. Sometimes, life surprises us. Fate has its own plans. Outside, the night air was cool and fresh. The city lights sparkled in the distance. The waitress took a deep breath, feeling lighter than ever. For so long, she had carried the weight of insults, of struggles, of being underestimated. But tonight, all of that was behind her. Tonight, the world had seen her not as a servant, not as someone to be mocked, but as someone worthy of love, respect, and happiness. And somewhere in the shadows of the hall, the ex-girlfriend stood alone, her pride shattered, her laughter gone. She had mocked the wrong person. Fate had played its game and she had lost. The waitress, once invisible, now walked into a future filled with dignity and hope. What began as humiliation had turned into the most beautiful twist of her life. The night after the charity event felt like a dream to the waitress. She had walked into the hall with fear in her heart, but she left with her head held high, introduced to the world as the future fiancée of a billionaire. For hours, she lay awake, thinking about everything that had happened. The mocking words, the shocked faces, the billionaire's proud voice announcing her as his partner. It all replayed in her mind like a movie. She had been insulted, doubted, and underestimated for years. But now, she had been given respect in front of the very people who once looked down on her. The next day, whispers spread like wildfire. The story of the billionaire and the waitress was on everyone's lips. Some people admired the courage it took for him to choose love over status, while others gossiped, unable to accept that a simple waitress had become his fiancée. But the truth was clear. No matter what anyone said, the billionaire's choice had already been made. He had chosen her and he stood by her proudly. The ex-girlfriend, however, could not escape the humiliation. Her friends avoided her now, whispering behind her back about how fate had played such a cruel trick. She had mocked the waitress in public, only to be silenced in the same way. No amount of money or beauty could erase the fact that she had been defeated by the very person she once thought was beneath her. She disappeared from the spotlight, too ashamed to face the same society that once adored her. Meanwhile, life for the waitress began to change in ways she had never imagined. Reporters wanted to know her story. People in her neighborhood looked at her differently, not with pity but with admiration. Her younger brother, who had always looked up to her, walked proudly, telling everyone, "That's my sister." But through it all, she remained the same. She still woke up early, still helped around the house, and still spoke with kindness to everyone. The only difference was the light in her eyes, the quiet confidence of someone who had finally been seen for who she truly was. The billionaire often reminded her that the journey was only beginning. "People will talk," he said gently, "but what matters is how we live our life. Respect is not given by money, it is earned by character. You proved that long before I met you." She listened carefully, always humbled by his words. To her, it was never about the wealth or the luxury. It was about being valued for her heart. At a private family gathering, the billionaire spoke openly about his decision. "All my life, I was surrounded by people chasing money, beauty, and status," he said. "But none of that matters when there is no kindness. She showed me what real strength looks like. The kind that comes from humility, patience, and love. That is worth more than all the riches in the world." His family nodded, touched by his sincerity. Even those who doubted at first began to see the truth. The waitress, sitting quietly beside him, felt her eyes fill with tears. She never imagined her life would turn this way. For years, she had endured insults in silence, carrying her pain alone. But now, the very qualities that people mocked, her simplicity, her humility, her patience, were the same qualities that brought her respect and love. One evening, as they walked together through the city, she asked him softly, "Why me? Out of all the women you could have chosen, why a waitress?" He smiled and replied, "Because you are not just a waitress. You are someone who never let life break you. You are someone who stayed kind even when the world was cruel. That is rare. That is precious." His words stayed with her forever. The lesson of respect spread far beyond their story. People who had heard about it began reflecting on their own lives. Some realized how often they had judged others based on appearances. Others remembered moments when they had been cruel without reason. Slowly, her story became a quiet reminder that respect is not about titles or money. It is about humanity. The ex-girlfriend, sitting alone in her grand apartment, also thought about it. For the first time, she faced the emptiness of her arrogance. She had chased status and mocked others to feel powerful, but in the end, it left her with nothing. Watching the waitress rise higher than her showed her the truth she had ignored all along. Pride destroys, but kindness lifts. The waitress's life continued to blossom. She pursued her education with the billionaire's encouragement, not because she needed it anymore, but because she had always dreamed of it. She used her new position to support causes that helped people like her, workers, single parents, and those struggling with respect in society. She never forgot where she came from, and that humility made her even more admired. At their engagement celebration, the billionaire stood once again before family and friends. Holding her hand, he said, "Let this be a reminder to all of us. Never insult someone because of their job or their position. Life can change in an instant, and the person you look down on today may be the one you look up to tomorrow." The guests clapped, their faces touched by the honesty of his words. The waitress smiled shyly, her heart full of gratitude. As the night ended, she looked around the room filled with laughter, warmth, and respect. She realized that the greatest victory was not becoming a billionaire's fiancée, but proving to herself and the world that dignity has no price. Fate had written her story in a way she never expected, but it was her kindness and strength that gave the story its true meaning. And so, the waitress who was once mocked became a symbol of respect. Her journey showed that the real measure of a person is not wealth, beauty, or titles, but the way they treat others. The ex-girlfriend's arrogance faded into silence, while the waitress's humility echoed like a lesson in every heart. In the end, the story was not just about love or wealth. It was about respect, the kind that is earned, not bought. The kind that turns ordinary people into unforgettable ones. And the waitress, who once stood quietly in the corner of a restaurant, now stood proudly in life, proving that no insult can stop a heart filled with dignity.